There's a kind of silence that follows after everything you've built starts to fall apart. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind. The kind that makes you question everything, your choices, your direction, even your identity. According to Alan Watts, that silence isn't something to run from. It's the beginning of something sacred. The idea that collapse and suffering are somehow essential to becoming whole can feel uncomfortable, especially when you're in it. But Watts argues that this breaking isn't random or cruel, it's divine. It's not destruction for the sake of destruction. It's destruction with purpose. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. A kind of spiritual surgery that removes what's false so the truth underneath can finally breathe. He calls it a sacred process. And it's not about being punished. It's about being reclaimed. That job you lost. That relationship that ended. That identity that stopped making sense. All of it, Watts says, was part of a larger pattern, a process designed not to ruin you, but to reveal you. Because most of us spend our lives clinging to roles and masks we were never meant to wear. And divine love, contrary to how it's often portrayed, doesn't just comfort you in that illusion. It challenges it. Sometimes it dismantles it completely. Because the truth, you can't become who you really are until everything false is stripped away. That's why the breaking is necessary. Not because pain is noble, but because the version of you that was surviving, performing strength was never the whole story. And when that version begins to fall apart, it hurts. But the pain isn't the enemy. The pain is the invitation. It's the call to something deeper, something that doesn't need to be performed or earned. It's the beginning of alignment. Watts speaks to this with clarity. That divine love doesn't always feel like safety. Sometimes it feels like being torn apart, but not out of cruelty, out of truth. Because if the only thing keeping you together is a false sense of self, then the most loving thing the divine can do is let that version fall. That version built from ego, fear, or the need to be accepted. That version that depended on external validation to feel okay. That version can't carry you where you're meant to go. It has to burn off. It has to collapse. And when it does, it's disorienting. But Watts insists that disorientation is sacred. Because what you're left with, after the fire, isn't emptiness. It's clarity. The chaos clears the illusion. The storm breaks the shell. And what remains isn't weakness, it's your essence. The part of you that was always real, but buried under layers of survival, expectation, and noise. This isn't just spiritual language, it's a framework for understanding collapse as transformation. Watts doesn't deny how painful it is. He doesn't sugarcoat what it feels like when your life stops making sense. But he redefines it. He calls it a sacred dismantling, a divine interruption, a break in the pattern designed not to punish you, but to wake you up. Because waking up isn't soft. It's raw. It means seeing clearly, feeling deeply, letting go of everything that once made you feel in control. Control that, Watts says, was always an illusion. This is the transformation Watts speaks about. Not a glow-up, not a reinvention, a return, a shedding, a realignment with what's always been true. That transformation doesn't come from effort. It comes from loss, from being cracked open, from standing in the ruins of who you used to be, and realizing you don't want to go back. Because going back would mean going back to sleep. That's what's so profound about this message. It doesn't celebrate the breakdown just to romanticize suffering. It honors the breakdown because of what it makes possible. That once everything false is burned away, the divine self, the real you, can finally emerge. And it doesn't emerge with noise. It doesn't need validation or a spotlight. It stands in quiet strength, radiant, not because it's performing, but because it's free. That version of you isn't trying to be seen. It is seen by the divine, by truth, by purpose. Watts calls this emergence the true self. Not the one shaped by culture or fear, the one shaped by the divine. And the only way to reach it, he says, is through the fire. The fire that purifies, not punishes. The storm that awakens, not destroys. The silence that grounds, not isolates. That's where you rebuild. That's where resilience is born. Not in bouncing back to who you were before, but in rising into someone new. Someone whole. Someone rooted. Watts makes it clear. Pain doesn't exist to break you, it exists to reveal you. It pulls off the layers. It exposes the core. And the core is never fragile. The core is divine. And once you've been through that, once you've sat in the silence, walked through the loss, and found yourself on the other side, you carry something unshakable. Not perfection. Presence. Not certainty. Peace. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next. And you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. You're no longer afraid of the fire. You understand it now. You respect it. Because it showed you what's real. So if you're in it right now, if everything feels like it's falling apart, if you're standing in the rubble, wondering if there's anything left, this is the moment. Not of ending, but of returning to what's real, to what's always been yours, to what can't be taken. Let the masks fall. Let the illusion collapse. Let the discomfort speak. Because on the other side of all that is a version of you that doesn't need to fight anymore. You won't come back louder. You won't need to prove anything. You'll come back still, strong, whole. Because the divine didn't abandon you in the fire, it met you there. It waited for you there. And it walked you through. If this met you where you were, if you've lived through your own breaking, or are walking through it now like this video, share it with someone who needs to know. They're not being punished, they're being rebuilt. Drop a comment if you've found strength you didn't know you had after losing everything you thought you needed. And subscribe if you're ready for more honest, sacred truth. Because this is where healing begins, not with pretending, but with awakening. Not with avoiding pain, but letting it guide you back to what matters most. Because awakening isn't a blissful moment of clarity floating down on a cloud. It's often messy, confrontational. It tears through illusions you've been living in for years. It rattles your identity. It strips you of certainty. And it leaves you in a place that feels, at first, like free fall. Watts makes no attempt to soften that. He says outright, what you call devastation might just be divine intervention. And that's where everything changes. Because the second you stop viewing collapse as punishment and start seeing it as invitation, you begin to participate in your own transformation instead of resisting it. You stop asking, why me? And start asking, what is this showing me? Watts points out something most people miss. The false self, the one built on fear, image, ego, is incredibly resistant to truth. It doesn't want to be exposed. It wants to survive. But it's not meant to. And so life, or God, or whatever name you give to the greater force behind it all, steps in. And instead of easing you into growth, it throws a match at the whole structure. Not to destroy you, but to force the question, what were you building your life on? For many, the answer is uncomfortable. We build on performance. We build on what others expect. We build on image. We build on survival instincts. That worked once, but don't serve us anymore. And when that scaffolding is ripped away, it doesn't feel like transformation, it feels like death. But Watts insists, it's not the death of you, it's the death of who you weren't. The ego doesn't die easily. It negotiates. It clings. It throws guilt at you when you start releasing the roles it convinced you were necessary to be loved. But the breaking won't let you go back. It's not designed to let you go back. Because everything you're losing, it was never permanent. The career title, the relationship that kept you small, the habits you used to numb your truth, gone. And yes, it's painful, but that pain is sacred. That pain is evidence that the soul is waking up from a deep sleep. The self that emerges after the fire isn't the same. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to be constantly affirmed by external things. Why? Because it knows who it is now. That's what the breaking is for. To burn off the fog. To destroy the need to constantly chase. To dismantle the belief that your worth is something outside of you. Watts doesn't suggest that this realization is instant. It's not a switch. It's a process. One that unfolds in silence, usually long after the chaos has passed. Because here's the thing, of the transformation doesn't happen in the storm. It happens after, in the stillness, in the rebuilding, in the sacred pause where you finally stop grasping and start listening to your intuition, to your spirit, to truth. Watts calls this space the real beginning, the moment where you're no longer driven by fear, where you no longer organize your life around the avoidance of pain, where you've been emptied of pretense, and in that emptiness, something real can finally grow. You realize, maybe for the first time, that everything you needed was always inside you, but you couldn't hear it over the noise of ego. You couldn't feel it through the armor. You couldn't trust it while you were still chasing the illusion of control. And now, there's nothing left to chase. You're free. Watts brings it back to this simple truth. The divine doesn't want your perfection. It wants your presence. And the more stripped down you become, the more present you are. Because you're no longer playing a role. You're just here. That's why Watts emphasizes the paradox. That what looks like loss is often the beginning of purpose. That what feels like collapse is actually a clearing. That what you thought would destroy you is the exact thing setting you free. And once you see that, you don't fear the next breaking. You respect it. You understand that when the cracks come again, and you won't resist them in the same way. You'll recognize them. You'll let them do their work. Because you know that your wholeness doesn't come from keeping it all together. It comes from letting go of everything that was never meant to stay. You stop trying to rebuild the old life, and instead, you start creating from truth. Not from fear, not from ego, not from scarcity, from alignment. You begin saying yes to the things that feel like home in your soul, and no to the things that ask you to perform or betray yourself. You let people go who only loved the version of you that was trying to survive. You stop apologizing for your clarity. You stop explaining your peace. And most of all, you stop fearing the breaking, because you've learned that it doesn't end you, it frees you. If you're in the middle of that process, if things feel like they're falling apart right now, remember this. The discomfort you're feeling is sacred. It means something false is dying, and something true is trying to come through. Don't rush it. Don't numb it. Don't try to package it into something pretty. Let it be messy. Let it be real. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to be whole. That wholeness might not look how you expected. It probably won't impress the people still living from ego. It might feel quiet, even invisible, but it will feel like peace. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on anything outside of you. The kind of peace that comes from knowing who you are, and living from that truth, without apology. Alan Watts didn't promise that the fire wouldn't hurt, but he did promise that if you let it do its work, you'd come out the other side purified. Not perfect, purified. And what's left after the masks, the stories, the striving is the real you. So if you're in the fire right now, if you're watching pieces of your life drop one by one, breathe. You're not being punished. You're being refined. You're not falling apart. You're falling into who you really are. And that's the most sacred thing of all. There's a moment, usually quiet, usually after the fire, when you realize the breaking didn't ruin you. It revealed you. Not the version of you that was trying to hold it all together. Not the you that hustled for approval, that clung to plans, that built life around what looked successful from the outside. That version, it burned. And Alan Watts says, good. Because that version wasn't real. It was scaffolding, temporary, unstable, built from fear and ego. You were never meant to live inside it. You were meant to outgrow it. And sometimes, the only way to outgrow something that tightens around your soul is for it to fall apart completely. The breakdown isn't a sign that you failed. It's a sign that the truth refused to stay buried. Watts doesn't romanticize suffering. He doesn't say it's easy. What he says is that pain is often the most honest moment you'll ever have. Because when the distractions are gone, when the illusions stop working, and when there's nothing left to pretend with, there you are. What's left isn't fragile. It's unshakable. Because it's real. You stop trying to rebuild what was. You stop scrambling to make it all look okay again. You begin to see that not everything lost was meant to be kept. And not every collapse is a crisis. Some collapses are holy. Some breakdowns are breakthroughs in disguise. Watts explains that divine love doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it comes in the form of chaos. Not because it wants to hurt you, but because it wants to wake you up. The love that wakes you up is not gentle. It shakes the foundation. It tears down what cannot stand. Because if it didn't, you'd stay asleep. And asleep is exactly what we are when we live through ego. When we wear masks. When we think that if we perform well enough, achieve enough, stay small enough, or stay quiet enough, we'll finally be safe. But safety isn't found in control. It's found in surrender. Watts is clear on this. Surrender is the gateway to truth. Not the kind of surrender that means giving up on life, but the kind that means giving up on the illusion of control. That kind of surrender, that's power. Because that's the moment you stop resisting the transformation. You stop begging the storm to pass, and start asking what it came to teach you. You stop fighting the fire, and start letting it refine you. You stop clinging to your old identity, and start stepping into your actual self. The self you were before life told you who to be. That self doesn't perform. It knows. It doesn't seek validation. It embodies truth. It doesn't run from pain. It understands that pain is sometimes the only honest thing in the room. And once you live from that place, you don't want to go back. Back to pretending. Back to pleasing. Back to surviving. You don't need to anymore. Because the breaking already happened. The lie already fell. The mask already slipped. What's left is clarity. Clarity doesn't come with fanfare. It comes in the quiet. After the storm. When the noise dies down. When all you can hear is your own breath. And the question, now that the illusions are gone, what do I want to build from here? That's the turning point. You build not from fear, but from love. Not from pressure, but from purpose. Not from the need to be enough, but from the knowing that you already are. You begin again, but differently. Slower, truer. You listen more. You force less. You stop grasping for things just because you're afraid of the void. You've been in the void now. You survived it. You found yourself there. And that changes you. Not into someone louder or more impressive, but into someone grounded, aligned, clear. Watts reminds us that this clarity is sacred. It's not something you achieve, it's something you uncover. And it's uncovered not by addition, but by subtraction. By letting go of what never belonged. By releasing what was never true. By surrendering to what wants to become. So when life breaks you next, and you won't panic the same way. You'll feel the shaking, but you'll remember. This is how new truth arrives. This is how the next layer of illusion burns away. This is how you meet yourself again. It's never easy, but it's always necessary. And always, always sacred. If you're in that moment on the other side of something that collapsed, or still walking through the fire, know this. You're not lost. You're being led. You're not broken. You're being rebuilt. And what's emerging is stronger, quieter, and more aligned than anything that came before. If this met you where you are today, give this a like. Share it with someone who's standing in their own wreckage, trying to make sense of the silence. Drop a comment if you've come through your own breaking, what it took, what it taught you, what it gave you back. And subscribe if you're ready to keep walking this road with honesty, depth, and grace. Because the breaking is never the end. It's the invitation back to the beginning of the truest you.